Chris, thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, and what a great show it is.
I'm excited because yes, before we were recording, you mentioned that what can I teach you? I feel like I still have a lot to learn when it comes to passive house construction because there's always new technologies coming. There's lots of things happening in the background that we don't know, and part of why I like doing interviews like this is because I get to learn. So I'm excited for that. And before we get into all the exciting things that we're going to talk about, though, I'd like to know a little bit more about you and what originally brought up this interest. Is sustainability and the environment just something that you've always been interested in, or was there a point in your life where there was a shift?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a rural part of Ontario, so the out of doors nature has always been a big part of my life. And whether it's camping or skiing or whatever, I was more comfortable outside than sitting in a classroom or sitting in a boardroom in a big city. So the out of doors and nature has always been a big interest. But I suppose about 30 years ago, I ran a public affairs company for about 27 years ago. For about 27 years. And starting then, for whatever reasons, I had a number of clients in the far north, in Northwest Territories, Yukon, Indigenous clients, worked for communities. So I spent an awful lot of time in some wonderfully beautiful parts of Canada. And even in those days, we were beginning to see the effects of what we now call climate change or the climate crisis. Pingos were melting into the ground. Animals that had never shown up in these parts of the world were showing up. Things like robins and wasps and other animals. Starving polar bears coming down from the Arctic Ocean and coming into small communities. Things that the elders said they'd never seen before. And there was real concern within the First Nation communities that their natural environment that they'd been in for at least 10,000 years was changing. And yet I'd fly back home, and down here, this thing called global warming nothing was happening. People really weren't talking about it. And at some point I thought, well, this is what we're talking about. I'm seeing this effect in the far north. It's happening there, but we're not talking about it down here. So that really sparked an interest of raising people's attention and getting people's attention, raising their awareness that this global warming thing is a real thing. And I could go on at length about how it has had very negative effects in the far north on Indigenous communities who have all sorts of struggles to begin with. But now face this additional burden of addressing the climate crisis. But that's for another show, because I literally could speak for a whole show on that. Yeah, so fast forward, a lot of the work I did was around working with these organizations in communities. I spent some time as a municipal councillor in a small town north of Toronto and focused on environmental issues, made sure that any buildings we were building were built to the highest level possible, or so I thought. So that really began my journey about how do we build a municipal building that is responsible to the taxpayer, but has as small a footprint as possible, environmental footprint as possible. And then from there, I became a member of provincial parliament, and then Minister of Housing, and then Minister of Environment and Climate Change, where I could put some of this thinking into play. So really supported the province's move to the cap and trade program to put a price on GHG emissions, on GHG pollution, and take some of those proceeds and put them into better housing, better social and affordable housing. And it gave me a great platform to knock on doors and to talk about the climate crisis, because we're past talking about the climate change. We now need to talk about the climate crisis because we're past that tipping point, in my view. And we're past focusing just on mitigation, stopping climate change. we're full bore now, my belief, and a growing number of people, full bore now on adaptation. How do we build to live in a world that is going to change significantly in our lifetime, even in my lifetime? And I am towards the end of my life. I'm not at the beginning of my life. But it's going to change now significantly in my lifetime. Are
you seeing momentum pick up in the let's call it the right direction, the direction that we need at this point?
No, I'm not. I mean, quite frankly, I'm not, and I don't want to be a downer, but I'm really concerned that we need to move faster and we need to move further. We're not going to hit, or else we're not going to hit our Paris Accord commitments. I think we're past that. So I left politics in 2018 and was approached actually by Passive House Canada, who are looking for a new CEO. I thought, this is really Passive House. The whole Passive House movement is a great great meeting of two of my interests. One is addressing the effects of the climate crisis, whether it be adaptation or mitigation, and the other is we focus a lot on just building better, building quality. And as Minister of Housing, I focused on a lot of social and affordable housing, and that's where there's a lot of uptake of passive house building right now, is in affordable and social housing. So those two things met, and I jumped on board. And it's been an interesting tenure. Of course, this last year has been really interesting, but we've come through it as a very resilient organization, and looking forward to continuing our growth. So that is in a nutshell, why I'm interested in what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, let's keep going on the Passive House side then. So sure. For those who are listening or watching, Ed, who don't know what Passive House Canada is, what exactly is Passive House Canada? What do they do? And how are they, supporting this movement that you're talking about that we absolutely need?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. We are supporting this movement. Passive House Canada is a relatively new organization, 4 or 5 years old. There were a number of smaller regional groups that we brought together to form this national movement. We're headquartered in Victoria, BC, but now half of our staff actually live and work out of Ontario, because there's been a rapid uptake, real interest in sort of central Canada for Passive House. First Passive House, certified Passive House in Canada was built for the Vancouver Winter Olympics by the Austrian government, and the then mayor of Vancouver toured it, was so excited, wanted to take that Passive House standard and use it in the city of Vancouver. So Vancouver's really led the way in developing Passive House, incorporating Passive House building standards into its building standards, its practices. And our job at Passive House Canada, really, we've got three. Our job is to make zero emission buildings known and adopted by government and by industry and the public. We're supporting government and industry in the transition to high performance buildings through education, through certification, through policy development. And we promote the Passive House Institute building standard. That is the Passive House Canada standard because it's globally recognized as the best building standard for high performance buildings. So that's the one that we adhere to. A lot of we do a lot of advocacy, a lot of education. Our advocacy focuses on government and industry. We're pushing federal governments, provincial governments, municipal governments to adopt high performance building standards. I don't care if they call them Passive House or not. They've got to get to that zero emissions. We think the Passive House standard has the clearest path to get there. And I can talk about that in a second. We work with industry. We work with the window and door, Canadian window and door industry, insulation, all the components that go into a high performance house, because they need some assistance in transitioning to this high performance marketplace. We're on a roll. We're heading in that direction. We'd like it to go faster, but it is coming. The federal government talks about net zero ready by 2030, and zero emission buildings are the only things being built in Canada by 2050. I'd like to say by 2050, you know, everything that's built, everything new that's built will be actually built to Passive House standards. So we've sort of won that one, but there's a lot of work to do in the meantime. A lot of work at the municipal level, and a lot of work to do provincially. So we're continuing to push government, but I am proud to say that a lot of our advocacy work is through education. We are the world's second largest certifier of Passive House designer consultants, second only to China, I believe. And I think this 2020, we graduated more designer consultants than any other country in the world. And these are engineers, architects, building scientists, contractors, people who want to build to high performance standards and need that technical background about how exactly do you do it? How do you design a building? One thing I will say, we're called Passive House, but we are way more than houses. We're involved, our standard is involved in building towers. It's involved with new builds, and we have a standard called Retrofit, which I think is where there's going to be great growth in the next few years. Retrofit allows us to, has a clear path on how to do deep energy retrofits. So like you know Passive House. I like the Passive House standard because it's yes, it's deep energy. It's low operational carbon or zero operational carbon. But it also provides buildings and homes that are comfortable and healthy. So healthy, comfortable, low energy, that's all wrapped up in the Passive House standard.
Yeah, that's the hard part. That's the stuff that we kind of use when we speak to people. It's the comfort and the health that you can't really put into a pretty picture. You have to experience it. To be able to say, like, and after living, I'm not in that Passive House right now, but after living in one for 4 years, like it's hard to go back to anything different, right?
I think you're right. I think we can all think about the first time we walked into a Passive House, and I don't live in a Passive House either. It's now on my bucket list, is that, my final home. I really want it to be a Passive House. My house is 1964, and it's a bit of an embarrassment, but we're working on all of the energy upgrades, all of the insulation upgrades we can do to get it to a better quality standard. But I remember the first Passive House I walked into. It was a raging storm, thunder, lightning, rain pelting down. The owner pushed the door open and I walked in. And when they shut the door behind me, it was like I'd entered a new world. The first thing that hit me was how peacefully quiet it was. You could see the rain hitting the window, but you couldn't hear it very loud. It was, because of the quality windows, the triple pane windows, you didn't hear it. The doors, the insulation, all of that. If nothing more, it's a beautiful environment to live in.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things, there are a few different certifies out there and there's different standards. Could you touch a little bit on that? And the other thing too is I want to get your thoughts on, there's kind of certified passive houses, but then I find that there's a lot of people out there promoting that they build passive houses, but they're not actually getting certified. And then there's also a misconception, I think, when it comes to passive solar homes, where people just try to use the sun to heat their home, but don't actually go to the extreme of getting the passive house requirements. Yeah. Maybe you can touch on some of those requirements, and then maybe some
sure.
Of the people can watch
one of the strengths of passive house, but also its weakness is the strength is that so many people have heard of a passive house. They may confuse it with passive solar, but a lot of people have heard about passive house. But in reality, virtually anybody, any architect or any builder can call themselves a passive house builder. It's not a trademark term. It's not copyrighted. If you're incorporating some passive building principles. I guess you could call your building passive, but there's an American in our area in Canada right now. There's an American standard, American organization, an American standard. There is the Canadian standard, which we represent, Passive House Canada. Our standard is Passive House Institute. It's the globally recognized, and it's the highest Passive House standard there is. There are some people who, and I think maybe this is the frustration that our American cousins felt early on, that they were having difficulty getting to the Passive House Institute level for certification. So their standard allows for higher energy usage. It's a little more flexible, we'll say, but it's still way better than the National Building Code. And then you have the Passive House Institute standard, which we're demonstrating more and more across Canada is quite doable as more people are trained. We have more architects, engineers, more tradespeople, more contractors who are trained in building to Passive House. It's becoming easier and less expensive. And as more Canadian components come on board, then it makes it much easier to source Canadian-built products because when you have to import stuff from Europe, where Passive House Institute is basically the building standard, for the longest time, most of the doors and windows came from there. But now they're being made in Canada. Even the HRVs, the heat recovery ventilation systems, we have them being made in Quebec and some in Ontario. So the prices are coming down. So we push the Passive House Institute standard because it's doable and it's the highest standard there is. Of all the building standards out there, Passive House Institute is the highest standard. For example, if you look at the BC Step Code, their highest level is in essence Passive House. If you look at the Toronto Green Standard right now, their Step 4 is in essence the Passive House Institute standard with some add-ons and some tweaks. So that's what we tell people. If you can build to Passive House Institute standards or Passive House Canada standards, you can build to any other standard that's out there, quite frankly. And the second part of your question was?
Oh, just wondering, it was asking about the different standards,
right? But
then also the differences between the passive solar house and then some of the
right. Well, there are 5, whether it be the American standard or the Canadian standard. There's 5 fundamental principles to building to Passive House. One is that you have lots of insulation. We're talking like R40 in the walls. That you have quality windows. They're triple pane. They have low E coating. They have a inert gas be separating them. These are quality windows. That there be no thermal bridging, so there's nothing from inside the building that goes through the wall to the outside and lets the cold in or heat out. So no thermal bridging, and that's actually probably among the trickiest parts of building. And that you have to have a quality air supply in this building because of its air tightness. You need a good quality air supply. So we talk about a heat ventilation or an air ventilation system with heat recovery. So an HRV that makes sure the building has plenty of fresh filtered air. And by filtered air, we're talking HEPA quality filters on the inbound air. And that, there's solar orientation where possible, meaning that the building is oriented, whether it be a tower or a single family residence, it's put on the property, located on the property so that the maximum amount of sunshine can come in the winter and warm it. But at the same time, you use trees or awnings to keep the sun from entering the building in the summertime and overheating it in the summertime. So those are some of the Passive House standards. When it comes to certification, I think that's one area that we all fall down on. It can be a bit difficult to have a Passive House building, even though it may be energy modeled and built and tested to Passive House Institute standards. The actual certification process is a bit onerous. And so we find a lot of homeowners, a lot of builders, it's just not worth it. They know they've got a passive house that's passed its air tightness testing, and they don't feel they need to go that extra step. We're encouraging people to go that extra step, and we're working with Passive House Institute to streamline that registration process, because there are hundreds of buildings across Canada that have been built to PHI standards that just never got certified. And it would help us all to know who they are so that we can learn from one another.
Yeah, that would be great, because obviously it is an additional cost that you don't really see any value, especially if somebody doesn't plan on staying in the home forever. The question that we're always getting from clients, is there value in it? And I can't, until recently, like I was mentioning before we hit the record button, where a passive house sold for $500,000 more than any other home in that neighborhood. It was really well designed as well,
right?
But the selling point was really the sustainable part.
Yeah.
So now maybe we're starting to pick up some of this momentum. People are realizing, because they have to spend so much more time at home, they're starting to appreciate indoor air quality and the importance of it and the comfort of their home, and these are all things that can be addressed.
Absolutely. And we find with residential towers, especially as owners are looking at renovating them, doing a deep energy retrofit, that by the time they do the facade work that they have to do because the building's aged, and they replace the mechanicals that they have to because they've aged, to take it to the EnerPhit standard is not a lot of money. But what it does do, provide each individual unit with its own private air source. So if you live in an apartment or a condominium, you're not inhaling air that your neighbor exhaled. You're inhaling fresh air from outside that's been run through a good quality filter. And in these times, that's really caught the attention of building owners, whether they be social and affordable housing, or even private residential tower owners. Condominium owners are really interested in that aspect of fresh, clean air, if nothing more.
Yeah. So I know, Passive House, as you mentioned, is really focused on zero emissions. Now, is there anything being put into the zero carbon aspect of things? Because there's a lot of insulation out there and materials that are great for zero emissions, but not really great for our carbon footprint. Right?
Yeah. So we look at, Passive House Canada is looking at two things. Our emphasis, the Passive House movement, the emphasis has always been on operational carbon. And by that, what natural or what oil and gas or carbon-based fuels are we using to heat and cool our buildings, whether they be towers or single-family residences. And that's where our expertise really is is reducing that operational carbon to zero. And we've shown we do this all the time. Our members do this all the time. The next big issue to tackle is embodied carbon, and that is the carbon content of the product being used to build that passive house, right from mine to incorporation in the building, or forest to incorporation in the building. What building materials out there are the best to use? Now, one of the things that I like that our members like about Passive House is it's not prescriptive. We don't say, we don't tell you what building materials you can use and not use. We tell you that, we talk about windows and insulation. So we're prescriptive when it comes to how you build your building. Make your building look any way you want. It's going to be really difficult if you've got flying buttresses and things like that to make that building Passive House. And you soon learn what works best for Passive House in terms of the look of the building. So we don't tell people, we're not prescriptive in terms of what they use. But as we drive operational carbon out of buildings, the next thing is embodied carbon. And Passive House Canada is moving in that direction. We have a plug-in already to our energy modeling software that allows you to look at the carbon imprint, the embodied imprint materials that you may be selecting for your body and or your building, and do some swapping to get that embodied carbon to a point where the total carbon footprint of the building is minimal. So, at Passive House Canada and Passive House Institute, the building scientists are looking at this. They made the decision early on that operational carbon is what we have to address. And then secondly, embodied carbon. Passive House Canada, we're already moving into that embodied carbon area because it's the total carbon footprint we have to be concerned about, we think.
Yeah, no, that I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, where do you see like the future of construction going? Like, do you see people actually taking on the passive house standard, or do you see more just clean energy being produced? Because I feel like technology it might be a balance. Like, for example, you mentioned R40 walls, but here for us to hit certification for PHI in Ottawa, the least we've done was the house that we built for ourselves was our 73.5 for our walls.
Yeah.
Like that's not an easy wall assembly.
That's a wall this wide. Yeah.
But the most we've done is like R92, I think.
Yeah.
Right? So and of the 4 houses that we've done, that's been the range.
When you get and when you have a 4-foot wide wall, that really impacts on the footprint and zoning issues, for example, or building issues with municipalities. So you well know that you can only build within a certain distance of the lot line. And if you've got a wall that's 3 or 4 feet thick, that really takes up a lot of space. So one of the things we do with municipalities, Vancouver being one of them, is if you're building to PHI, you're going for a Passive House certified home, they will allow you to encroach on that space, get closer to the lot line, to allow the indoor space to be what it would normally be if you built to a code home. So if you're building a 2,000 square foot home, you get a 2,000 square foot home. The exterior measurements of your house are well more than 2,000 because the walls have to be so thick. So it's some of that tweaking that we work with municipal governments who have the authority for their local building. We work with them to make sure they've got the right policies in place or are aware of. First of all, they have to be aware of Passive House and what it means. And then when they become aware of Passive House, how do they change their building policies to promote and accommodate Passive House construction? So that's, when I talk about government advocacy, that's a lot of the nitty-gritty sort of thing we do.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear because that would be great. Like a lot of the homes that we did that we build are outside of the city, but we have done quite a few inside. And then, like you said, you have a 2.5 foot wall, yeah. Small inside.
Yeah.
And you don't have the perfect orientation. So you got to work with what you have, right? Which is going to affect the modeling too. So it's definitely an important part. It's all part of what we call the integrated design process.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole integrated design process is the big revolution that has arrived for architects, designers, contractors, and ultimately, from our experience, saves the homeowner money. But I was gonna, you mentioned insulation, so I just wanted to make a point about Passive House Institute and its DNA. And its DNA really has its roots in Canada. And I'll get to insulation in a minute, but back in 1977, the Saskatchewan government and the federal government all governments were very concerned. I think it was the first round of the oil embargo from Middle Eastern oil producers, OPEC oil producers, turned the taps, slowed the taps down. Canadians and the Canadian governments were very worried. How do we heat our homes, our businesses in the wintertime, right? We didn't have the Alberta production that we have today. Saskatchewan federal government, the question they asked to their researchers, their building scientists is, can we build a house that people can live in that won't use much energy, right? Can get through a Saskatchewan winter without using much energy. And lo and behold, they built a prototype called the Saskatchewan Conservation House, still stands today. There's families still living in it today, still performs to the standards that it was built to, which were high performance standards, low energy standards. One of the chaps involved with that, his name is Harold Orr. He's since been awarded the Order of Canada for his work in insulation and his work promoting high performance buildings. So two things. The modern Passive House Institute standard has its roots in Canada. There are a number of other building science projects going on around the world in northern climates at the same time as the Conservation House. But when Europe was looking for a better building standard, they came to Canada. They came to talk to Harold Orr and his colleagues, and they took boxes of data home and codified it and improved it, but in essence made the Passive House Institute standard today. So when someone says to me, oh, you're using an imported standard from Europe, no, not really. It started here in Canada, it went to Europe, and it's now come home again. It's come home even improved, but it started here. But Harold Orr, I had him on, I do a webinar every month. I had him on my show a couple of months ago, and Harold is well into his 80s, engineer, masters of engineering. First home he built was with his dad back during the World War II era. It was a rammed earth house, so he's been interested in alternative building from day one. He is now working on, along with others, there's good work going on in universities and research centers across Canada. But he's working on super insulators. You know, if you can imagine R40 insulation that's 1 inch thick, for example. Yes. So to get to that R90 wall for you, we won't have to go 3.5, 4 feet thick with traditional, you know, mineral wool that we're using now and exterior boards, etc. So even though Harold is, you know, in his 80s, we still support him because of the great work he's doing in the world of insulation. I mean, how much more Canadian can you get than that, right? Insulation, keep us warm in the winter, and increasingly with the climate crisis, keep us cool in the summertime. That's becoming a huge problem in southern Ontario and in southern BC, is not just getting through the winter, but getting through the summers. That's going to become a bigger problem in the years ahead, and it's why the Passive House standard speaks to, you know, creates a resilient building. It's one that will be able to manage the coming crisis.
It's so true, especially like it's the same here in Ottawa. We have both extremes for weather, right? And you have all these windows that you can open, but you maybe open them like 4 weeks out of the year in total, just because the rest of the time it's either too cold or too warm, right? So you spend all this time indoors with windows closed. So all the more importance to put time and energy into making sure that your home is airtight, healthy, and has fresh air coming into it constantly.
Absolutely, and what I find, what we know with Passive House, you know, Passive House Institute standard was sort of designed. They took the Canadian standard, the cold weather standard, they modified it for more of a temperate European standard. We've taken it back, and we've got both the, you know, you can use that standard, that the energy modeling software to model to virtually any zone, temperature zone you're in Canada. But we encourage our designers to make sure they take into account the weather in 2050. I mean, we're building buildings today, especially Passive House buildings. You know the quality you have to build to build a Passive House. We're building buildings that are going to make it past 2050, and we need to do the energy modeling to make sure that you are warm in winter, but kept cool in summer. One of the things I love about the new generations of heat recovery ventilation systems is how they can dehumidify in the summertime. You know, you could have your house internally at 26 degrees centigrade. Normally you'd be sweltering if that was the temperature inside your house, but through dehumidification, it's quite livable. You know, it really is quite livable. So these are some of the things we need to wrap our minds around. We don't have to turn our houses into chilly meat lockers to be comfortable. In fact, it's not healthy to do that. Just do some dehumidification and the world is different. So, you know, this is the thing I really like about Passive House and good designers is that it focuses on future need as well as today.
So last thing I want to touch on before, because I know you have to go, I do want to touch a little bit more on existing buildings, carrying off of that older houses. We're actually in the process of renovating a 161-year-old house right now, stone home.
Wow.
Yeah, we're not going to Passive House standards, but we're definitely improving the air tightness. We're doing a liquid applied air barrier, and we're adding more insulation and
good quality windows, putting some good quality windows in, lots of insulation in the attic.
Exactly. And really focusing on that air tightness aspect and, you know, adding the ERV and so forth and getting off carbon as well.
Excellent.
So what are things like, how does the standard change for the Enerfit program? Is that something that's more easily attainable? Because we all know like there's way more existing homes than there will ever be new homes, right? So
yeah, exactly. If Canada is going to meet its GHG reduction targets, it needs to rapidly focus on deep energy retrofits. Right now, the federal government thinks that 25% is pretty darn good. It's nowhere near where we need to go. One of the things that Passive House Canada brings to the table is the Enerfit standard, where we can, where we have a guide and tools to help designers get renovation projects to 75% of the energy that the building used previously. So our new build is 90 to 100%, and our Enerfit is 70 to 75%. That's actually happening across Canada. It's being adopted by people who are renovating towers, but it can be done on homes as well. It's a little trickier on homes because it's more expensive per square foot for a single family residence. But Enerfit, you know, I would encourage people to check out our website, passivehousecanada.com. All sorts of information about not only the Passive House Institute building standard, but also Enerfit. And it's got all the information about the courses we teach. So whether you're a member of the public, a homeowner thinking about building or having someone build them a passive house, or they're thinking about buying a passive house, or if you're a tradesperson who's looking for some trades training, or an engineer, architect, or whatever, we've got some pretty good education for everybody. And your folks your audience can check the website out and learn from there. But Enerfit is where we need to go. And so all the focus has been on sort of the National Building Code. It seems sexier talking about new builds, but we have to really get our mind on deep energy retrofits and how we're going to do that. And Enerfit, it shows you how to do that, quite frankly. So we're encouraging as many people to take that banner up. But, you know, at the end of the day, I keep talking about Passive House Canada and our standard and Enerfit. We're really pushing for zero emission buildings, you know, and shoot for the sky, try for Passive House certification. And if you can't get there for whatever reasons, many times it's technical, you can't orient the building, you don't have enough money, whatever, but you try for the Passive House Institute standard. If you fall a little short, you still have a building that is way better than if you built to code. And I'll also say Passive House Institute and Passive House Canada, we actually have two certifications. We have the Passive House Institute, the top level certification, but we also have another one, and Passive House Energy certification, which is also a good plaque to stick on your house. And it doesn't hurt to get you into the system so that we know you're there and we can all share. It's one of the things I've learned about the Passive House community is how connected they are and how, you know, during business hours, they're competing with each other. They're going toe to toe for business. But after hours, it's amazing. You know, the work that folks do together, competitors by day, and working together at night to solve common problems. And so we run a lot of seminars and social events, and where builders and architects put their project on display and talk about all that went right. But more importantly, they talk about what didn't work right and how they had to fix things and challenges. And we all leave having learned an awful lot. So it's a great community to be part of.
Yeah, it's definitely a small community for sure, where everybody is very supportive. On the competition side, I can't say there's much competition. I guess it depends on which city you're in. So that's good. Anyways, I'll share all those links in the description.
Great, thank you.
So everyone has them, including all of your social links as well. Before I let you go, any parting words? You give us lots of advice, but any final parting words of advice? And what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, or do you just send them to all the other links like Passive House Canada?
Yeah, I would say if people want to get in touch with me or Passive House Canada, learn about what we're doing, check out our website. All the contact information is there. It's passivehousecanada.com. We're happy to communicate with you via LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever. I think the parting words are that we have to do more as a nation. We have to do more as individuals to address the climate crisis. The climate crisis is here. It's not looming. It's here today, and it's affecting our lives today. We need to do more, and we can't wait. We can't wait till 2050 to get to zero emission buildings. We need them, today. So I would encourage people to be activists, to talk to their friends and neighbors, to become aware of what the challenges are, to talk to their elected officials and push them to move to zero emission buildings. Even if they're not Passive House certified buildings, we need our buildings to be zero emission buildings.
And share this episode, because this will be the kickoff, right? So
absolutely.
Share this episode.
Share this episode far and wide.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on here and share all your information and wisdom with us. It's great to hear all the things that you're working on and that the industry is working on. I see, like you said, it's not where we want it to be, but it's nice to see and hear people working towards this cause. So hopefully we can pick up that momentum sooner than later. Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. And thanks for having this show. This is a really important show you're putting on, part of the movement. So thank you. You're very welcome. Good. Take care. Have a good day.